Hello, and thanks for joining me today. My name is Jeff, and you're listening to episode 22 of the Comic Book of the Day podcast. Hello, and thanks for joining me again. Welcome back to another edition of the Comic Book of the Day podcast. Today's comic book is War Heroes number 2. This was published by Charlton Comics, and this was in April 1963. Now, that date is actually going to be fairly significant, right? So this is War Heroes, right? Issue number 2. Now, right on the cover of this, you can understand why this one is well, I don't know if I would say important, but you can understand the significance of the publication date and why this was something that I grabbed. I think I got my hands on this book a while back, and this, in fact, this might have been one of the first war comics that I think I collected. I over the course of my youth, I think the war comic that I picked up the most, I wasn't a big Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos reader, right? I didn't read Nick Fury. I didn't read Sergeant Fury. But I did read some Sergeant Rock. I occasionally would get my hands on GI Combat. That was really the book that I remember most of all as a youth, as a child, as a kid, getting into. I think I probably went through, I don't recall exactly when. I think it might have been around the time that the movie Midway came out, or at least when I saw the movie Midway. I don't know how many of you have seen it, but it's a terrific movie. I think that was probably the first war movie that I saw as a kid, and I that probably ignited my World War II phase, right? I think, every kid probably goes through a World War II phase at some point in their life. I don't know why kids don't go through a World War I phase. I think as an older guy, probably in, I don't know, sometime around college maybe, or I don't know. At some point when I got to be a little bit older, I started to have an appreciation for World War I. I read The Guns of August at some point. Well, okay, let's be fair. I didn't actually read The Guns of August. I got the unabridged book on audio, and it was a hella long book. I mean, that thing probably took me about 4 weeks to get through, but it was terrific. I mean, I don't know that I would have necessarily been able to sit down long enough to read it, but at the time during, on my commute, I was listening to the audiobook of The Guns of August at some point, maybe when I was commuting to school or something like that. But I remember sometime around college, I think it was, that I got my hands on The Guns of August and really sort of got turned on to a World War I phase. But World War II, I think, is for every kid. I think another movie or TV show at the time that sort of got me into World War II, particularly the Pacific War. I think I probably was much more into the Pacific theater. If I were to pick, if I were to look back on the things that interested me the most about World War II as a kid, I think I gravitated towards the Pacific theater. Of course, later on, being in the Navy and actually, touring the Pacific and going on what are called, Westpacs or Western Pacific cruises. I spent a lot of time in the South Pacific and spent a lot of time in the Pacific Ocean and going into the Western Pacific. And, but at the time when I was younger, I think it was the Corsair, the Navy Corsair, the Battle of Midway, the Pacific theater that probably held the most interest to me. And I remember there was a show at the time when I was a kid called Black Sheep Squadron, starring Robert Conrad as Pappy Boyington, who ran a ragtag group of naval aviators out of the South Pacific. And that was, that and the Battle of Midway, again, sort of another Pacific theater, a real epic battle of the Pacific theater. And then it was probably, again, I think it was probably later on, around college that I started to, read more about the European theater and the Battle of the Bulge and the invasion of Normandy and things of that nature. But I don't, if I were to gravitate towards something, if I were to gravitate towards something that would grab my interest about World War II, then it would have been something about the Pacific. It would have been something involving the Pacific theater and not necessarily so much the European theater. So I get, given that it was just that war comics as a kid, I don't know that they were necessarily my thing. Like I said, I would read some GI Combat. I would read, maybe some Sergeant Rock. But this one is definitely one that I picked up, probably one of the first war comics that I picked up. And this one is, the story of John F. Kennedy's PT-109. So April 1963, of course, John Kennedy was assassinated in November of 1963. So this would have been in April of 1963 with a newsstand date of April 1963. This would have probably been on the stands, I don't know, around like February or January, early of 1963. And Kennedy, of course, was sworn in 1961, January of 1961. So this was the second or third, about the second year, the middle of his presidency. So, he was probably at the height of his popularity then. And I think, I went back and I read a little bit about sort of the background and the history of PT-109, and the comic, does a great job of mythologizing. Make sure I say that right, mythologizing. It definitely does a great job of sort of elevating John F. Kennedy to the myth status that this was really sort of intended to do and was sort of playing into at the time, because apparently when John Kennedy was in office, this story really sparked the imagination of the nation. I think there was a sort of a renewed interest in Kennedy's exploits during World War II, and particularly this story, which is, you give it credit. I mean, this is definitely a heroic story for the ages. I mean, Kennedy was awarded medals. I think he was awarded the Navy Cross, maybe. I think it was the Navy Cross. But the legacy of this lived on, well after he passed on. But it was during this time in the early 60s that this story sort of reached its peak in terms of the zeitgeist of being in the public's mind at the time. There was one thing that I didn't know, and honestly, I really didn't realize this, but they actually found PT-109 in early 2002 or around 2002, and the people, the Islanders who had helped John Kennedy during while he was evading capture and was looking to get rescued, were still alive at the time, and they located the Islanders and presented them with awards and whatnot, and they became somewhat famous again, right? I think they didn't have a whole lot of notoriety during their lifetimes prior to 2002, but finding them again and locating them again in 2002, it was part of a National Geographic expedition or whatever it was, but they discovered, I believe it was the front of the ship, the bow of the ship. So Kennedy was awarded the Purple Heart for this, and he got the Navy and Marine Corps Medal. He was later assigned as the commander of another PT boat. These small PT boats, torpedo boats, right? These are patrol torpedo boats, right? PT boats. Patrol torpedo boats. They're smallish, right? They have 37 millimeter cannons. They're about 80, I guess maybe just under 100 feet long. They have a crew. I don't know. I'm trying to remember how many. They may be like a dozen. Maybe a dozen, maybe 14, 15 people on crew these ships. They're smallish. But yeah, all of this sort of really happened, and, based on a true story. And, this led to President Kennedy being considered, quite the hero at the time, and captured the imagination of the nation. And, unfortunately, it would be probably 10, 11 months later, he was assassinated in Dallas. And, but this was sort of at the height of that time. So this is 1963, April 1963, one of the earliest war comics that I think I bought for my collection. It's not in great condition, but it's, definitely whole. I'm guessing, I don't know, but I'm guessing this was probably printed in rather large numbers, right? I mean, you imagine if this is 1963, Kennedy's in office, there's a lot of there's a movie coming out, there's a song on the radio about it. It's just a lot of attention being lavished on the president and the heroic actions. And of course, you come out with a comic book around that time, and I'm guessing you probably print, a metric ton of these books. But this one is definitely one, if you're hunting for war comics, right? This is one of those ones that kind of, jumps out. It's not your average war comic. It has a little bit of, historical significance in that it's President Kennedy, and it's published in 1963. I don't have my Overstreet guide handy with me, but I think you can. I don't know necessarily that this is too out of the realm of being able to purchase. Just a real quick eBay scan turns up a couple of copies of this going for around $8 in fine-ish condition. So it's definitely something that you could afford to purchase if you were so inclined. The interesting thing about this, too, is that the art is apparently by Dick Giordano. So I'm imagining this is probably some early work by him. I don't know exactly when he started drawing in comics, but 1963 seems like it's relatively early in his career. So yeah, you got a couple of reasons to collect it then. It's a pretty decent war comic. It's affordable, right? It's not too unaffordable for you to get your hands on. It's of decent vintage, right? 1963. It's got a little bit of historical significance. So it's definitely got a little bit of collectability, especially if you were into war comics. So I'll tell you what, do yourself a favor and head on over to comicbookoftheday.com and give it a shot, give it a look-see, see what you think about the cover. I think the cover's actually pretty cool. This is a pretty cool-looking book. You can imagine it would definitely sort of capture your imagination if you were, so inclined, if you were into World War II, or you were into the Pacific Theater, or you were into John F. Kennedy for whatever reason. So yeah, give it a shot. Check it out. See what you think. Head on over to comicbookoftheday.com. Remember, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, and you can subscribe on Google Play as well. Get it in your inbox every day, or in your podcast software of choice. You can also follow along on Facebook at Comic Book of the Day if you're so inclined. You can follow us on Twitter at CB of the Day. We're on Instagram as well. So track us down. Follow us in whatever your appropriate or your favorite social media platform is, and don't be afraid to reach out and say hi and give us a shout out whenever you can. And enjoy, man. Thanks for listening to Comic Book of the Day, and we'll see you again tomorrow.